Media Essential Workers, thank you for joining us again. I'm joined by someone who actually worked in the same building as me at the NBC Tower Boat. Our paths didn't cross, actually. I'd see you sometimes as you were leaving. And it's interesting to get the chance to actually talk to you a couple of years after the fact. And that is Cheryl Stutzke. Cheryl Stutzke, you've kind of been at a couple of different stations, and we want to talk about your experience there. But I am going to take a moment to point out in your background, I see some Mickey Mouse dolls, and I bring that up. It's kind of over your right shoulder here. I bring that up because that was kind of instrumental, in what got you into the television industry. Kind of tell me what your motivation was and how those little figurines there played in.
Well, when I was a little kid, I always had to, I was raised on a farm, so I had to make sure that I got the cows in from the field so my dad could milk them before the Mickey Mouse Club came on the air. And it came on the air at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on WHBF TV in Rock Island, Illinois. And I loved the Mickey Mouse Club. And I thought, gosh, if I could ever, get a chance to do something like that, I would like to. And I would, I'd read TV guidebooks, and I, read articles about, what a producer did, what a director did, all those different kinds of things. And when the Mickey Mouse Club went off the air, it was replaced by a 15-minute newscast hosted by Jess Marlowe, who went on to be the news. He would deliver the news on the Today Show, and then
Cheryl, I'm going to ask you this. Did that sour you to news? I mean, here you are trying to watch the Mickey Mouse Club, and all of a sudden you're interrupted. There's an interlude by the news. Or did that then fascinate you?
News got me hooked. I am a news junkie. So watching those early newscasts, and there wasn't a lot of news. I mean, there was, oh gosh, now I can't remember his name. But it was hosted by a watch company. And, those shows would be on the air, and you'd try and watch as much news as you could. Or you'd watch a show on Sunday called Omnibus, which really wasn't a news show, but it was more of an arts show, and it was kind of done live. And they would do ballets, and all this stuff was done live, and concerts and things like that. So, that was interesting. But that 15-minute newscast, okay, well, I got to watch the news now. So I watched the news and got hooked. And then the network newscast came on, Walter Cronkite. Before that, it was Douglas Edwards, and I don't know. I just got hooked on news.
Well, so I'm
reading it and, doing.
So I'm going to ask you this, because news is also in my blood. It's something that I've done. I've always wanted to do. Been doing it since my 20s, but since a kid, I was watching that. But what actually intrigued me, and I kind of gleaned over this, was you're a director, and you've gotten the opportunity to direct and do other things in television aside from and outside of news. Let's talk about your education and then your first job, which was in children's programming. It was actual local puppeteering, a local production that I found fascinating, because being a director now in news is very different from having local productions that people got to work on. You were the staff of some of our people might remember this. A lot of people like myself probably won't, and I put a link on the show in, but tell us about BJ and the Dirty Dragon show.
Dirty Dragon. Well, I went to work at WFLD 2 months after they went on the air, and I was answering phones. And then, over the, few years that I was there, working in different departments, and Bill Jackson was hired to come and do a kids show on the station. And I went, I got to work with this guy, because he was imaginative. He was a great writer. And as such would happen when the WFLD studios were originally in the Opera House. At the top of the Opera House, there was a TV studio up there. And FLD wasn't the first station to use those studios. We were the second. While they were building what's now the House of Blues, which we called the Whale. And we had big studios in there. And those studios, the design of those studios actually won an Emmy at one point in time.
So we're talking about kind of where the House of Blues is in the Marina Tower complex.
Right.
That House of Blue area was what was called the Will, according
Right.
to where the studio was by the people who worked there.
Right, right. We called it the whale. You go in the same doors. Well, not really. Those doors out there. There used to be a big glass around it, and there was a big desk there where they had guys that would park the cars for you. They'd be like valet parkers, and then you'd walk straight ahead to the wall, go around behind the wall, and there was an elevator there that took you up to the second floor, which were the studios of WFLD, and we had the first floor was studios, second floor were offices, and the third floor was the attic, which was storage and you know things like that. That's where they would the shop where they would make some of the sets and things like that. But then
So,
when
so I'm going to
I
ask you
went
this, and
back to
I'm just going to jump in real quick and ask you this, Cheryl. So when we're talking about Bill Jackson, that was a name I
right,
wasn't so familiar with. That was kind of legendary
yeah,
in Chicago television at the time. Like I said, I've put some links in if you're reading kind of the bio. So if you're not familiar, you can look. But one of the questions I asked you is, what was the level of celebrity of Bill Jackson? Was it like an anchor person now? Was it like an actor? And you kind of put it into perspective for me by putting it into context with another children's television show at WGN. Tell me what the legend of Bill Jackson and that show was.
well, Bozo was the big show at the time, and that was on the air at noon. Our show went on the air at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So he would run segments with his puppets, and then he would lead into cartoons. But when you go back and take a look at it, there were so many. We were always looking for ratings, and at that time when WFLD was on the air, you were lucky if you got like a one rating
Mm.
because nobody had UHF just built into their TV sets. They had to actually go out to Sears or someplace like that and buy a box with an antenna to hook up to their TV so they could get those stations. And FLD kind of really pushed the button on that, where they signed the White Sox to
Hmm.
baseball games. And people were forced, if they wanted to see the White Sox, they had to go buy a box. And I mean, I was the one that would field all the phone calls, and they were pretty upset by that. But Bill, his show, we had a huge following, but we never knew how big it was until we started doing weekend stage shows. And what he did is that we decided to run Dirty Dragon for president in 1968. It was just sort of a gimmick thing. And we went out and we did stage shows, and we would go to the theaters, and we kind of had it worked out with the Balabit and Katz studio theaters. That was the old State Lake building. It was the Chicago Theater, and there's the Uptown. I think they're trying to bring that one back again. But we would either go into a shopping mall or we would go into these theaters, and they'd be packed. Main floor balcony, you know, packed with kids and parents. And the same thing when we would go out to these rallies, like they do today, that we would do at oh gosh, I think the Brickyard was one place we went to, the old Ford uh, shopping mall. And, the kids would come, and we had we had a life-size character of dragon that would come out, and some of us, I was a group of four gals, we called it 4 or 5 gals, we called ourselves the dragonettes, and we were kind of the color, around the studio. And we were the ones that would we had these little postcard kind of things that had pictures of Bill and Dragon, and thank you for watching, and we pass them out to the kids, and the kids loved them. And sometimes there were little games that we would play with the kids, and we'd have prizes for the kids. And we did that, and then
Now, did he
You know,
make headway in the Chicago electorate? Because obviously, obviously, with the whole party system, you needed to know somebody at the time.
yeah. Well, we don't know how many votes he got. He may have gotten some write-ins, but we're not sure. It was, you know, it was a fun thing. It was a fun thing for the kids to do, you know, and it was fun for us. We had a ball. We had a ball doing it.
Well,
Because we would
you
go
know,
out and we work with the cities and we would do parades. You know, we had parades. We had uh, the police department, the fire department. We'd have Dragon on the fire department, you know, truck, and then we'd get people from the area who had antique cars, and
yeah.
they would drive their antique cars, you know, in the parade. So there was a parade and then a rally. I mean, it was a lot of fun.
Well, yeah, you know, it reminds me because I watch an episode of a series called Black Mirror, where one of the satirical things that they do is run a kid's cartoon character for president. I'm not going to spoil the ending for anyone who doesn't watch, but it takes some turns, and it's interesting to know that this is kind of loosely based on something that that was a gimmick, but it sounds like a fun gimmick with the
Yeah.
Dragonettes that you guys kind of pioneered back when you started.
Yeah, and we got some viewers out of it, and then Bill decided to, and the station decided to put the show. Again, what time did we go? I can't remember what time we went on the air, but he wanted to do a live studio show. So we hired some dancers
Hmm.
and an additional, the guy that was doing the dragon. Uh, we hired a different guy to come in to do that, and he ended up, you know, being with us for a long time. And a guy named Ian Harris, and we had a couple of dancers and they would dress up like Mother Plumtree and the Old Professor, which were Bill's characters. And got a picture over here. You want to see a picture? It's a big poster.
I would love to see a picture. I
Okay,
would
hold
love
on
to
just a
have
second.
an illustration of what this was like. So if you're just joining us right now, I'm on with Cheryl Stutzke, who was a director in Chicago News for a while. But what we're talking about is earlier how she was with children's television, local pioneering programming that I'm just fascinated by. And she is showing us a picture right now of some of the stuff that she worked on. And Scott Fisher is actually one of our viewers who's talking about he loved it as a kid. So for anyone who hasn't seen it, these would be some of the characters, and for our others, maybe you have some fond memories of these guys.
Yeah, that was Bill and maybe you have to pull it back a little bit, but there's the Old
Sure.
Professor.
Also, yeah, you were likening the celebrity to close to a Bozo the Clown type thing. Bozo was at noon on WGN at the time, followed by at 4 o'clock BJ and his cronies. What was it like? Yeah, go ahead.
The stage show was fun. And you know, Bill was great. He seems to think he's more of a legend now than he was then. It was when the show went off the air, it was like, oh no, it's gone. And then Bozo went away, and there wasn't anything for these kids to watch anymore. I mean, when our show went off the air, when BJ and Dirty Dragon, the stage show, went off the air and went back into a studio show, we were booked with audience a year and a half out. So, you know, a year and a half worth of kids, 250 people in a studio didn't get to see the show. And that was pretty much, I mean, we were gaining the numbers that Bozo was, because at that time, I think Bozo was booked like 5 years out. You basically had to ask for a ticket when your kid was born, and hopefully, you know, by the time they were old enough to come to the studio, they'd get a ticket and could go, you know. So we were, you know, building up to that.
You were the staff on that show. What does that entail? I'm reading on your bio, we had discussed that you were making clothing. You were doing runs to get props from at the time on Randolph Street. There were kind of prop stores, or not prop stores. What exactly were there? And tell me, it was a prop store. Tell me about what your day was like, a typical day being staff on the show, BJ and the Dirty Dragon.
Well, well, I mean, there were so many different things I do. I have to make sure we had all of the prizes for all the games that were played and that were given away by kids. So I'd be working with like Hasbro toys, and there was another one in the area. I also worked with Tootsie Roll to get the big Tootsie Pops, that I don't know if they have them now, but they're big Tootsie Rolls, and they're all filled with a bunch of Tootsie Rolls. Um, and we'd get like easy bake ovens, which were a big kid thing back then, and some other toys, and we'd bring those in. And we'd work out a trade out deal, because so every time a toy was given away, their name was mentioned on the air, so that was the trade out. And so you didn't have to pay them any money, and you got toys. But I would, I'd do that, and then I'd make sure the cue cards were done for the tapings in the afternoon. And then it was just a matter of answering the mail. And I
Hmm.
mean, it was huge mail bags that would come in from the post office that were delivered every day. I mean, six big mail bags. We'd go through, and we had this thing where we felt like we needed to answer everyone, because we were trying to build an audience and to build a following. And so it was a lot of,
If you're in our generation right now, and watching this, it would be the equivalent of social engagement. If you post
pretty,
something, you're going to want
yeah,
to respond, because again, you're going to
yeah,
want to continue that dialogue. These kids were not to be left disappointed. If they sent
no,
something, especially they were waiting for these tickets, their parents were waiting for these tickets their whole life. They expected probably a response back. So you guys were processing those.
yeah. And then we would run contests too. We had this one time where we got uh, Bill Jackson red bowlers. Originally, he wore a red suit, and then when he went to the BJ and Dirty Dragon show, he wore a blue suit. Okay, so we had these red bowlers, and they had. I spent a lot of time doing this. They had a band that had to go on them and stapled on that said the BJ and Dirty Dragon show, and then we'd
Hmm.
send the kids one of those postcards, and we'd also send them a big pencil that had the BJ, that had Cartoon Town with Bill Jackson or the BJ and Dirty Dragon show on them. So, when kids would send in for stuff, we'd send these things out. And then I mean, there were times when I would go out and get a big truck and drive the truck to the studios, and we'd load it up with boxes, and I'd drive it to the post office, which was then the one by the Eisenhower Expressway. That, I don't know, they're building a hotel in there now, but deliver all the boxes, and get them mailed out. And I made costumes for all of the live performers during those shows. I also made costumes for the puppets, because we got to the point where
Now,
sometimes
who
we're
is
doing
more demanding, the puppets or the dancers? Like, who was a bigger
both.
critique of your work?
I'm sorry. What? Which was what?
No. I was just saying, who was more critical of your work, that this doesn't fit my style. Redesign this dress. The dancers or the puppets? I imagine they
No,
were both.
no. They had to dress like the characters.
Okay,
So
so they had very
and
little choice in the matter.
yeah. So Mother Plumtree always had a flowered dress on with a lace collar, and the old professor, we sort of tailored an old male suit for him, and added some a vest, and things like that to it. And then Bill created the heads for the puppets, and that was quite a process, because he would mold them, and then they were latex, you know and then I made Dragon. I made him he needed a new post office suit. Then he needed a zoot suit, which was a plaid suit, so that he'd look like somebody from the 20s. And then once he started going to the Emmys, he had to have a tuxedo. So I built Dragon a tuxedo. And he looked pretty damn good too.
So we painted a picture of what it was like working on one of the local production shows at WFLD, and I want to state that one of the first things when we had a discussion, and I called Channel 32 accidentally Fox. This isn't what it was. There was no affiliation. This was Field, and you guys had pride in what you did, and you had a certain type of ownership, right? You had Marshall
Right.
Fields that owned this. You had Sun Times reporters who helped do the newscast along with Chicago
Right.
Daily News. Talk about how that collaboration works. So did you actually have Sun Times reporters doing the television reporting, or how did
Yeah.
that work?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. Herman Kogan, who is legendary in this town when it comes to newspapers. I think he was editorial director, but then he became like head of news at Channel 32 at FLD,
Okay.
and he hired. I would assume he hired Dick Hance, was a news director, and Dwight Bishel was one of the directors. And then, oh gosh, I can't remember the writer's name, but one of the writers that we had on that early show that was hosted, the anchor was Pat Muldowney. One of those writers, and I can't remember his name. I'm sorry about this, but he went on to be Walter Cronkite's right hand guy for all of his newscasts until he retired. John Ward was his name. John Ward.
Well,
Great
so
guy,
I'm kind of, I'm interested in like how the infrastructure of this works. So,
yeah.
so this news operation had Sun-Times ownership, or let's put it this way: the Marshall Fields owned it.
Ownership, but then what they would do is that we actually had writers and reporters also at Channel 32. But when there was a bigger story, like it was the headline story, I mean, when they first started out, like the headline story or the head writer of one of the stories of the Sun-Times, they had what they called a little lipstick camera, which was about that big. And they had it set up, and this was like new technology, and they had it set up, and then the microphones at that time were about the same size because they were, the big lavaliers. And we would put I didn't have anything to do with it. The news department would put the writer of the story in front of that lipstick camera with a microphone, and then they would tell the story that they had written, in the Sun-Times and or Daily News. And I can't remember us having any cameras in the Daily News. I knew we had them in the Sun-Times. They were
very interesting.
They were Sun-Times. Yeah, there was
the early collaboration at Channel 32 about the Sun-Times, and how they worked as a fusion with the news department of early 32, Channel 32.
Yeah, well, Herman was involved in all of that, just making it all work and making sure the reporters knew about it. And, eventually they got the idea that, I'm going to be on TV and I've got to look good, and things like that. So it was, it was early newscasts. We do a half hour, and I can't, Rich maybe be able to, I don't know if our first newscasts were 15 minutes long or not, but they eventually became a half hour. And then we had we got a weatherman, and I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. Maybe it'll come to me. He went over to WGN, and I think retired from WGN, but he worked for us. And then with the White Sox games, Jack Drees was their announcer, legendary, sportscaster. And Jack would do the news. And then there was also another news guy, and it's another name that escapes me. I've been trying to remember all these people's names, and
no worries. But one of the names that I remember, the one that's hard to forget, is Pat Lake, who was a director at NBC, who told me, I've got to reach out to you. We've got to talk because you had a lot of experience as a director, which is an industry that's changed quite a bit over the years. Again, we were talking about how you started with, you started being kind of staff with Bill Jackson and everything he was doing with his show. And there was a lot of local production shows. At some point, you became a director, and kind of tell me how it went from being a director of a local children's show to news. I understand a lot of people a lot of directors didn't like the fast-paced production of news. Being a creative director, how did it rub you?
Well, I never directed the kids. I never directed Bill's show at Channel 3. I directed, routine, which I mentioned to you, was rolling the shows, making sure the commercials aired at the right time, making sure the next segment aired on the air, and just keeping the station on the air. And I stage managed there. But then I went over to CBS, and there was programming over there. I mean, they had 3 studios that were busy morning till night, and they had 3 full crews. 3 cameramen in the morning shift, 3 in the mid-afternoon shift to evening, and then the crews that would come in and do, they'd overlap in the newsroom too. So there was a lot of overlap, and luckily I got to do a lot of the programming, and it wasn't until they started not doing local programming anymore that kind of what was left was news. So you had to be able to do news. And I mean, my I was thinking about this. What could I tell you? What is the one thing I hate about TV news? Lower third banners. I hate them. I don't think, I mean, you kids now, you're so used to them all the time. You
I
see all these
absolutely
banners.
love them. When our
I
program started, I was quickly writing our lower third right here. I can't do it without it.
right,
To me, it looks
right,
naked without the lower third, but that's one of
right,
the things
right.
that you didn't like, huh?
But but see, in my philosophy, when I grew up as a kid, we grew up watching a little black and white TV set that was, you know, not even 12 inches by 12 inches. It was small.
Yeah.
Well, as I grew up in television, the picture got bigger. You got a bigger picture, and now you've got, you know, really big digital, cameras. And I'm going, the one thing I don't like about banners during sports, if you're showing a golf game and you want to show the hole in one, it's behind the damn banner. Unless
I
the
see
director
how that might be a
takes it,
problem
right?
and a challenge for a director.
Right, it is. And, if you don't know it's coming, and usually you don't, because when you're working, in the newsroom, you're getting, I mean, the anchors may have had a chance to see the copy, but you're looking at blocking the shows. Hopefully you've gone through, you don't read the script until you're actually in the show and maybe reading along with the teleprompter or reading along with your script and knowing where they want to drop the supers in, where they want to roll the tapes, where they, their clips or, whatever they're doing now. But it's really changed a lot, because when I was first directing at Channel 2, they had a film department. So they were still doing film, and they
Hmm.
would process the film in one of the rooms there. And another guy named Buzz Hannon, he started working there. I don't even know if he was working there when he was high school. He started very young, and he started working with the film people, and then worked his way up, and has been a stage manager. Was a stage manager there for years until he retired. But yeah, it's different. It's different now, and the
I'm going to
director.
talk about a few things here. I'm going to talk about a few things that you have done. Football, you've done presidential, Gerald Ford in Illinois, campaign pre-election day shows. You've done various things, Aaron Waters show, the
Right.
last Ditka show. Tell me about some of the memories you have about some of the things that really were like, oh, that was cool. I'm so glad I got a chance to be on that. And some of what inspired you to continue to do uh, the kind of the quality of work and being like, this is why I got into it. It's not the Mickey Mouse Club, but it's something that's damn cool.
Yeah, yeah. The show with Gerald Ford. Uh, he was down in the ratings and was making a last ditch effort by going to some of the key battleground states and doing a half-hour show with the local senator. And so and he was, his partner was Joe Garagiola.
Hmm.
Now, Joe Garagiola was a baseball player and then went on to be one of the hosts of the Today Show. Great guy, wonderful personality. So he and Gerald Ford and then Senator Percy came in to do the show. And at that time, I was working 9 at night to 5 in the morning at Channel 2. And then I would I'd drive across town to ABC and work 6 to 2 there. But the day of that election, I swear to God, I didn't sleep for 2.5 days. But we started production on that show right away. And the thing that struck me the most is that after having worked out all this production, I'm hearing in my ear that President Ford is, coming off the elevators at ABC, coming down the hall, and he's going to be coming into the studios. And I'm, standing back like I normally do. Nobody went up to him and said, welcome. And I find there was nobody there. And I'm going, what the heck is going on? So I went up to him and I said, hi, Mr. President, and shook his hand. I'm Cheryl Stutzke and I'm your stage manager for tonight. Won't you please come in? And here's what we're going to do. And he was my best friend for the rest of the night, you know.
Wow.
And when it came to after the show, there were pictures that needed to be taken. And I had a little brownie camera, you know, nothing fancy. And he made Joe Garagio to take a picture of he and I. So I got a picture of Gerald Ford as president, you know, but other people that I met, you know, over the years doing the different shows. I mean, Jimmy Carter, Vice President Bush, the first, you know, and you know a lot of political people, which was kind of interesting. That was a highlight show for me. And then all the shows at CBS, sports. I was stage managing. I was always up in the booth with the announcers, making sure they promo the right show when they needed to, and they got to the commercials and
Well, there was one CBS show in particular I wanted to talk about. We actually had Jack Suske yesterday who talked about his time on the Springer show and how when Springer first started, he tried to be like that other show, Phil Donahue, which you had a chance to work on at your time at CBS. No?
Not yes? Even close.
Well, tell me what it was like working on that show. I know that was initially the goal. You were on the Phil Donahue show. Tell me what that was like.
Okay. The Phil Donahue show had been came from where'd he come? Cleveland to Chicago, and was at WGN for about 7 years or more. So I started watching his show opening mail in my apartment at night, because his show wouldn't come on till 11 o'clock at night. So I knew who Phil Donahue was. And then when I was at Channel 2 and I got on staff there in 79, Peter Lund, who was the general manager, Phil approached CBS, Channel 2, and wanted to work in a more unionized shop, with the different people in the different unions, because eventually they were going to move the show to New York. So they signed a contract for 3 years. Phil was smart as a tack. I mean, and not to say Jerry Springer isn't. Jerry is also very smart. He wouldn't become mayor and wasn't a lawyer for nothing. Phil knew how to massage people, get them to be involved. And I mean, he was the guy that started the talk show. And I mean, we went up against Oprah the last, I think, year and a half or so, when she started to get big, after she had come to Chicago to do the AM Chicago show. And there's a difference between them too. I mean, she has a certain type of charisma and Phil had a certain type of charisma. Phil maybe had 1 or 2 cards in his pocket, but he knew his subject forward, backwards, inside out. He didn't need any notes. He didn't use teleprompter. He didn't do any of that. He just started the show and he was off. And I just had to make sure he got to the breaks, and sometimes he, you never saw it on camera, but he'd come back to me and he'd make a face and he'd go, no, I don't want to do that. And you had to like massage him and get him to, go to a break. But Phil was great to work with. His staff that he had, they were also great to work with. And we had a lot of, I enjoyed that show a lot. And, learned a lot of
things. Yeah. One of the things I do want to touch upon was you were one of the first women kind of in this industry, at least in the broadcast industry in Chicago, if not the first amongst the first. What was that experience like? Was it challenging? What was it like?
Well, it was just, I guess being raised on a farm, my dad always said there isn't anything you can't do. You just have to put your mind to it. And I just wanted to do television. I was lucky enough to get it at 32 and then, go into stage managing, directing, and, doing those kind of things. And it worked out. There weren't women doing my job. There was one woman, and whose name I cannot remember now. She worked at WTTW, and she was a director. And this was early in the 50s. And then she got out of it. And then Karen Prindle was working at WTTW in a non-union position over there. TTW is now a DGA station, but back then it wasn't. And FLD became a DGA station once they unionized. When I first started working there, there were no unions. There was an ABIT, there was an IBEW. FLD was an ABIT station and a DGA station. So when I got the job over there, you joined the union. That was part of the deal. You got the job, you joined the union. And from there I went to Channel 2, and other stations in town didn't have women working for them, especially ABC. And program director at Channel 2, Jamie Bennett, was engaged to a gal named Carolyn Depke at ABC. And I had gone to school with their production manager, Joe. Joe, I can't remember Joe's last name. And so they wanted to have a woman come in and see how it would work with the guys, the guys on their staff, if they would accept them. So they called Arthur Schatz, who was a production manager at CBS Channel 2, and that's who I worked for. And he asked me, he said, "Cheryl, would you like to go over to ABC? They're trying to figure out if their guys can work with a woman." And I went, okay. It was like I wasn't going to have any work at CBS for a couple of weeks, and I could get a couple of weeks of work over at ABC. Sure, I'll do it. And everyone couldn't have been nicer. I mean, there were a couple that I will not name, but
there were always a couple.
There's always a couple, but I mean, for the most part, the guys were great. I mean, there was, no big deal. And myself and Karen Kors and Sandy Newcomb were the first women at Channel 2. I was directing, and Karen and Sandy were technicians. Karen was the first woman technician hired there. But it was early on, and we had the background, and evidently.
Well, you told me a story about a little bit of a drama political in terms of you were doing a lot of technical work, so you would wear a pant, and there was a gentleman in some sort of leadership position who's like, yeah, you know what, I'm not familiar, I'm not comfortable with her wearing pants as opposed to dress for that line of work. Tell us a little about that.
That was years ago at Channel 32. Because once I started working in the studio, the new studios, which is now the House of Blues, there'd be different things that we'd be doing. Sometimes I'd have to crawl around on my hands and knees to, work on props and stuff like that. And it wasn't necessarily advantageous to be doing that in a skirt. So, and I had to walk in the winter across the Chicago River, to go to Randolph Street, where there was a magic shop that we would get props at. And then sometimes there were different places in Marshall Fields where you could always find something, that you could use. But this little magic shop, and I cannot remember the name of it. All that whole block is gone now. But it was right next to Flo's restaurant, which had really good pie in the window. Anyway, but right across the alley from them was this shop. And we would buy things like crepe hair, which was sort of a braided thing that if you pulled it apart and you used gum, there's a certain kind of gum that you use. You put the gum in your face and you put the crepe hair on, it looked like you have a beard. and we'd use that stuff on the BJ show, or there'd be other things there that we could only get there. And I have to do that in the winter. And I've got boots on and my legs would freeze. And I said, I want pants. So my mom and I came up with a really nice pair of pants and a vest and a couple of blouses that matched, the outfit. And so one day I had to go over and make copies of scripts over there, and I had to walk through the building with my pantsuit on. And the general manager's secretary saw that, and she evidently had a fit and went to Cliff Braun, and Cliff just sort of shrugged his shoulders, because he had all kinds of women work for him, and his wife was the assistant program director at the station. So he always pushed women, to be in, different jobs that, men had done. And she went to a guy named Manny Fingerhut, who was the human resources guy at the station. And she wanted me fired. And Manny called me and he says, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, I had to wear a pantsuit because it's cold. It's walking across the bridge." I just explained to him what was going on. I'm just trying to be warm. And he goes, "Keep wearing those pantsuits. It's good." And so he made his secretary right away put out a memo that said, from now on, women at the station don't have to wear dresses and skirts. They can wear pantsuits. And it had these
the same
thing. And,
yeah.
I went, all right, that's good. I didn't lose my job because I wear my pants.
Well,
now today it's a given,
No, and it's crazy because when you had first told me that this had happened, I thought maybe it was a male culture that brought that on, but it was actually a female secretary that had an issue with it. The same one who then had to do a memo stating that this is now the officially you have the blessing.
Yeah, she didn't do the memo. Somebody higher up did the memo. But it was good, and she unfortunately had a sad ending, and I won't even go into that. But that's what
so we have a few minutes here, Cheryl. So I do want to remind our viewers, if you're just tuning in, looks like we had a kind of an influx of people tuning in. We are with Cheryl Stutzke, who's kind of telling us a little about her time in television. She's a director. She's done other things. She was the staff on the BJ Cartoon Town with Bill Jackson. She was kind of telling us about how that whole thing was. So you've had kind of an illustrious career in television. Is there any advice you'd want to give to people, whether or not they grew up on a farm like yourself, who just want to achieve the dream of, hey, television's cool? If the younger generation now even still thinks television's cool, I'd like to believe that they do. I'd like to believe that there's a real resource that we offer, a real value in broadcast news. What advice would you give?
Well, I think the one thing would be to shoot high. Don't be satisfied with working at your regular station. If you really want to do production and programming, today you got to go out to the West Coast. You got to go to the West Coast. I mean, that's where it's being done. Or you go to Atlanta. There's a lot of stuff being done there. You can go to Canada. There's a lot of stuff being done there. You just have to go to where the work is. But today the medium has changed so much that we have all these other different influences now, like your show. Who would have thought? You know
what? It's gotten a pretty good following. And again, I think content is always very important, right? I think there was a niche in telling the stories of the storytellers with this phenomenon of stating fake news, this and that. I thought it was important to give journalists kind of a venue to talk about what it is we do, especially working out in a pandemic. And it seemed like people were interested in that. But you're absolutely right. If there's content to be told, you just got to find the way, I guess, to tell it, right?
To tell it. And there's so much being done today. I mean, so much imaginative stuff. I mean, you take a look at the network Emmys this year. I mean, I don't think there was one ABC, CBS, or NBC show that won Emmys for, quote, programming. They won Emmys for news. CBS, won Emmys, and different people doing that. But there's so many different platforms today that there's a lot of content. I think the thing that you have to be careful about is that news today is different. I mean, I watched in the newsroom, in the Channel 2 newsroom. I watched when I worked in the NBC newsroom, uh, because Frank Whitaker, who's now vice president of news at NBC, was the 10 o'clock news producer at CBS, Channel 2. And if you wanted to get a story on the air, there was the assignment desk, who would send, the crews and the reporters out to do the stories. But there was also this layer that your stories had to be checked for accuracy. And stories didn't get on the air unless you had 2 or 3 sources to back those stories up. And, they would hold stories until late in the newscast and make it like, well, then it wasn't called breaking news, but, it was this just in,
Hmm.
Until they could get it cleared, and it would have several sources. And that's still happening today, I'm sure, at CBS. I know it was happening at NBC a couple years ago when I left. Joe Colina, who produces their 10 o'clock, one of the producers of the 10 o'clock newscast, executive producer, I think his title is, he made sure, he says, if you got another source, we need another source. We've got to confirm this story. And I think a lot of the people that watch TV news, I mean, I've had conversations with people that I went to high school with, who think they know how news is, and they think it's a hoax, and they think this, that, and another thing. And having to explain to them the process that the newsrooms go through before they put a story on the air. The fact that, a story sometimes has to go through a control room to make sure that a face is blurred if it's a child. There's just a lot of different things that, come into play. So, when you're working in the newsroom environment and you'd hear about a story, of a kid, I'd walk in that day and you'd have to do what we called mixes, which was making sure that the tapes and, things had blurred faces, or we had to put text on stories, things like that. You sort of knew going in that, well, hey, that's going to happen today. And so, I mean, there's a lot more to news, and I don't know, there's a lot of stuff that I watch on news today. I mean, I force myself to watch, I shouldn't mention this, Network Fox News, and there's a lot of bias from them, and you want to go to at least in my estimation, you want to go to a source where you can really see, locally. I think, locally, Channel 32, you know, they do a credible job, in what they're doing. They got a decent news department, uh, and
Well, and again,
so
the argument always is,
yeah,
yeah.
it's like,
One of the arguments I always make is when journalists go out there, we're not making up any of the pain these families are feeling when they've lost someone, or what's going on in the community. These are all genuine emotions that someone in your community is feeling, is experiencing,
right.
that we're casting a spotlight on to show that this was something that happened in our community. And we were actually talking about this with our guest yesterday as well, Jack. That yes, sometimes we see that there is more and more editorialization in some of these some of the networks, but it's very important, I think, to keep in mind that we need to be discerning about what the facts are and keep kind of sometimes the editorial out of it, because again, I think that sometimes drives this new phenomenon of just casting all of the media in a certain light, when in reality, a lot of us, and again, that's what I try to profile here, are out there trying to tell a story that impacts people in the community.
Right. I mean, I mean, every day I watch all 3 network newscasts. I record them and I, run through the commercials, but people don't like it having you hear that, but I've kind of seen them. And, but you watch those 3 different newscasts, and I mean, I always start watching NBC because I love Lester Holt. I mean, I work with him at CBS and work with his son at NBC, and Lester's just a great guy. And so I'll watch his newscast first, and then I'll watch CBS. And CBS will always take some of the same stories, but there's always just something a little different about it or more information that you'll get. And then I'll watch ABC. And ABC will do the same stories. They'll be, tell it like it is news, but then they'll also maybe add one or two other stories that the other two networks didn't carry. So, you can't just watch one. I feel you got to watch, those three. And then later on, maybe I'll pick up a Rachel Maddow show because I just think she's brilliant. I mean, Rhodes Scholar, the whole thing. You listen to her talk and, she's interesting. And I'll watch Chris Wallace, on his show because Chris worked at Channel 2 when he was first starting out in his career back in the early 70s. So there's just like a lot of people I worked with that I have a lot of respect for. I have a lot of respect for Chris, and I like his interviewing. I think he's really good. And there's just different people, and I like to get the different sides of the story.
Understood. Cheryl, I really want to thank you for taking some time out of your day to join this and shed kind of a light on what it was like working at these different stations throughout this whole period. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing some of your experiences. Really enjoyed it. And we will talk soon. And I want to thank all of you guys for watching as well.